Hello, I'm Bob the Bookerer and welcome to my channel. And today I'm going to be talking about the books that I've read this week. And I'm just soon about to go on holiday for a week. I'll still have videos and everything uploaded and ready, but it's sort of a weird thing of sort of like reading kind of slightly intense things when I really need a break. But some good books nonetheless this week. So let's talk a little bit about them here. First up, I read The Wren by Enright, and I've really enjoyed the books I've read of hers before. I think she's a really fascinating author. And The Wren is really focused on a mother-daughter relationship. So also why like peak Booker 2023, and didn't make it on there, unfortunately. And the mother-daughter relationship in this book is a really quite beautiful one. We've got sort of Carmel and Nell, and they are sort of often misunderstanding each other. A really interesting thing I found was something that came up in an interview that I listened to with Enright, where she spoke about having to get inside the head of a younger woman for Nell's part, and how it was really interesting for her as an experience, but also, you know, it's often sort of over imagined as being the trickiest thing, but actually I think she captures the voice of Nell really strongly, as this sort of woman who's floating through life a little bit, is doing some things that are quite damaging to her, to herself in some ways. So she is with various awful men. She has various sort of interactions where she's not particularly enthusiastic about it, but kind of goes along with it. And I think as the book goes on, we sort of see a little bit more about how she might sort of realize her own value and her own worth. In the meantime, we've got Carmel, who is just a really interesting character, I think, in many ways, as well. And I think between, you know, Carmel is sort of trying to really deal with the sort of the loss of her father and kind of thinking through some of the ramifications of it, and the kind of way, and this is something I've noticed in a few of the books that I've read by Enright, she's very good at capturing that kind of sense of how family and memory kind of sometimes are really powerful things for us, but can also be sort of things that imprison us to some degree. And so she talks about how the memory of her father, this sort of famous poet, and there are bits of poetry sprinkled throughout the book that Enright has written herself, how all of those things collectively come together to sort of make this really suffocating atmosphere at times, but how at the same time those memories are so important. So yeah, Enright writes beautifully, I think. And I think the thing that I found especially powerful in this book, as with her other books, is how she needles in and finds that one little idea or thought that is just incredibly powerful, or that says so much. So at one point she talks about how a character sees information as being like going shopping, but she doesn't want you to spend it all in one place. And I just thought that there's such a clever observation about how some people treat information as this sort of scarce resource that you can't dole out too often. And so I just think it's really brilliantly done, and I just absolutely loved this. I just think Anna Enright, I think, is maybe 3 for 3 now for me in terms of books I've read of hers that I just thought were phenomenal. The Gathering and Actress being the other two. I just think she's great. Yeah, that's basically all I need to say about it. I think she's just a very precise and composed writer, and I really love the way that she gets inside the heads of characters and gives them unique and distinctive voices throughout the book as well. Next up, so I recently read The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion, all about the loss of her husband particularly, but kind of dealing a bit more with grief and loss in general. And there's a follow-up book that she wrote afterwards called Blue Nights, which deals a little bit more with the death of her daughter, and particularly the sort of her daughter kind of becoming quite sick and various other things. And I found Blue Nights really quite powerful in so many ways. I think whereas The Year of Magical Thinking is perhaps more of a distinct book about loss, in some ways, this book feels a little bit more like just a conversation with the daughter that she can't have. So she can't have this conversation right now. So what does it sort of manifest as? And so Joan Didion just sort of explores all of those feelings of grief and loss and so many other things in this really beautiful package, I think. I think what's quite arresting in a lot of her in a lot of what comes up in these two books is the way that she is able to try to find the kind of absurdity in those small details. So you're at the hospital and this small thing happens, or there's this word on a sheet that doesn't seem to make sense to anybody, or why do people keep on referring to the ventilator as just the vent? She sort of is like, well, this is such shorthand, but then she immediately starts using vent herself. All these sort of odd details about how grief and loss really manifest in a certain way for her. And I just think it's really beautiful. I think she's just got a really interesting way of writing, and I think I'm very keen to finally join the Didion train about 47 years too late, and finally read a bit more of her work. But I just found these two books really interesting for how they explore something so personal, and how she's able to do it in a way that doesn't feel like she's poured out her guts, but how she's been able to reconcile some of the complicated emotions that are bound up in it all. Next up, I read two books by Edugyan, who is the chair of the Booker Prize judges this year. I have only up until this point read her non-fiction, which was the brilliant Out of the Sun. And so I kept on being told basically that I needed to go back and read her fiction. And so I read Washington Black and also Half-Blood Blues. I don't know why I can't remember any of the names of anything anymore. And I mean, I'll deal with them both separately, but I think as a sort of sum total, I think she's so interesting as a writer. I'm kind of seeing this kind of in her fiction from, you know, I as I mentioned, I loved that book of nonfiction by her. And particularly the way that she's able to have this broad span of looking at history and finding really important and interesting details in that. And it's probably no mistake, therefore, that both Half-Blood Blues and Washington Black are historical fiction in some variety. So starting with Washington Black, that deals really specifically with the slave trade, and particularly the sort of relationship between two characters at the heart of it. Wash, named after Washington, and he is this really fascinating character in many ways. He's this young boy. He has only really ever been on a plantation. He is sort of introduced to this whole other world, and we basically follow him in an almost like David Copperfield like sort of story of watching him kind of have this brand new life, sort of far removed from what he's been used to. And equally, we've got another character who's really central to this book. Shorthand name is Titch, his sort of nickname, Christopher being his full name. And he lives life very, very differently. He's the person kind of opening these doors for Wash, and taking him through life. And all of that sounds quite beautiful as I'm saying it, like it's going to be this really lovely, heartwarming tale. And many parts of it are, but obviously given the nature of what it deals with, we look a lot at how Wash is trying to move through the world, where occasionally there are posters that say, you know, be on the lookout for a young boy who looks like this, who's escaped from a plantation, and yada yada, and he's very much treated as property. So there is a real sense of, you know, someone's stolen my property and he needs to be returned to me, that kind of goes through this book. And I think it's really, he just lives this really precarious and tricky life, but also with just so much joy and other things that are kind of given to the wider character. So I think I just found it really interesting as a book, and I think I'm really keen to read a lot more of hers as well. And Half-Blood Blues, I'm just near the end of, but what I'm really enjoying about this book is how it also looks at historical fiction through a really interesting lens. So we have at the heart of it a character who is in wartime Germany, essentially, and he is a jazz musician, and the difficulty he finds is basically being at the sort of nexus of all of these big historical events happening. He's there as the war is coming to an end. As the war is really gearing up, rather, he's there through so many really tricky, complicated parts of history, and it's just this absolutely bizarre time for him. But at the same time, there's this real love of music and of beauty and these gorgeous things. But it's kind of this complicated thing. He's in Paris. I don't know why I'm saying he's in Germany. But because he is German, he has this sort of odd relationship with the world around him. He's German, but because he's black, he is seen as not German. He's there during a time when Germans are sort of, being sent to front lines to fight. But he's there at a time that is where he's also one of the people who is being seen as an other. So I just think it's a very clever book. And I think so far the kind of feeling I'm getting from the 3 books of hers I've read has been the way she is able to, really reach into history and find the stories that haven't really been told, and kind of convey them in a very realistic and sort of very real way. And to end on a lighter note, because I'm aware that a lot of the reading I've been doing recently has been quite heavy, I read Sean Lusk's The Second Sight of Zachary, Cloudesley. And this is a sort of fantasy sort of novel, kind of a bit steampunk. It's kind of very much focusing on that kind of really interesting intersection in history where, you've got things like the Ottoman Empire, you've got all these other big kind of powers in the world. And it's this really strange time of just pre sort of big bits of technology, so sort of 1700s, and sort of before this big sort of industrial push, but where things are really starting to heat up and sort of these sort of wars. And in the meantime, in all of this, he's this sort of slightly strange character who has these slightly fantastical powers, and there's sort of a lot about kind of this sort of clockmaking thing. That's kind of what makes it feel a bit almost steampunk, even though that would make it's pre-steampunk in that sense. It's not Victorian, but that kind of bits of tech and bits of sort of fantasy and magic and this sort of very grisly time. But it's just this really beautiful book at the same time that manages to feel very very kind of grounded in the reality of the history of the time, mentioning the Ottoman Empire and various other things, but also just has this real fantastical, fun element to it that's just so interesting. So this made me smile. It was a really, really beautiful little book that was just a nice break from some of the heavier stuff. And you will be, hopefully, pleased to know that my holiday reading, I'm hoping, will be a little bit lighter. I've already got a couple of nice, more chilled books ready to go. There are still quite a lot of, I'm going to try and, I don't know, maybe not over my holiday, but I've got some books on the go in terms of like Booker winners or like Goldsmiths Prize books that I'd really like to read. I might pause them for a week just to allow myself the ability to enjoy some books that are not that while I'm on holiday. A very sorely needed holiday, because I haven't really rested properly since like March. So I'm kind of dead on my feet, and I'm very excited for this. Anyway, I hope you're having a good week. I will see you potentially slightly more tanned in a week's time, and I hope you have a lovely time. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye bye.